Welcome back, everyone. I'm here with Greg Grinberg, the founder of ActualFoods. Greg brought so much energy to my class yesterday and today. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thanks for having me, Teresa. This was a lot of fun.
It was, and I learned a lot, and the more we talk about actual foods, the more I learn. So I'm going to give our audience a head start by sharing my version of what I learned, and then you can fill in the blanks.
Sounds great.
So from what I understand, ActualFoods is tackling the chronic disease epidemic. Chronic diseases are responsible for 2/3 of deaths in the U.S.
Worldwide, actually.
Worldwide, and cost billions, if not trillions of dollars in healthcare spend.
3 trillion in the
3
US.
trillion, there you go. So the idea is that since the science is unequivocal behind the relationship between diet and obesity and chronic disease, your theory of change is that if we can somehow get people to eat healthier, they and society can save so much on healthcare spend, right?
Exactly. I mean, the missing link here is really, it's a behavioral problem. We know from a medical standpoint what causes chronic disease, and we know that lifestyle medicine, food chiefly among the lifestyle factors, is the best way to prevent and even reverse most incidents of chronic disease. The problem is getting people to actually eat in a way that reverses and prevents chronic disease.
Right. So I'm going to tell everyone what ActualFoods actually is. But first, one thing that really resonated to me as part of your backstory was how supermarkets right now, the way people access their food, are set up for failure. You walk in, there's a huge display of soda. You go to the candy aisle, there's buy one, get one free, half off, etc. And so based on what I learned from your lecture, this has already been paid for. Supermarkets for these products are not just profiting from what you're paying them, but they're profiting from what the manufacturers of these unhealthy foods are paying them, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually learned first from Kelly Brownell, who used to run the Center for Food Policy and Obesity here at Yale before moving on to lead the public health school at Duke, that many supermarkets now make more money from those alternative revenue streams that processed food manufacturers pay to promote their products in the store than they do from selling food, which is a really kind of scary thought.
And so as online grocery shopping is picking up, your idea is to create this online platform where the opposite takes place, and through the technology that your team is building, the customer is nudged in healthy ways.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's so much temptation in the field of public health, I think, to kind of lament that humans are irrational in our buying behavior, that we're so easily influenced and so easily kind of led down these aisles of temptation. And we kind of take the exact opposite view on that. Rather than saying that that's a problem and that, wouldn't it be better if humans were more rational, if we could all somehow harness our quote unquote system 2 thinking instead of being led around by our system 1 thinking, as our friends in the behavioral marketing department might put it. Our approach to it is like, let's just roll with how we are.
We have the science, right? We know how and why people behave the way we do.
Right.
So let's just work with that.
Exactly. Let's deal with the way that people actually make decisions rather than saying, wouldn't it be better if people were completely different than they are?
So some of the features that really spoke out to me were that there's beautiful photography, which you don't see on other online websites. Like, you really want to buy this healthy food. It looks so good.
Oh, thanks. We're really happy with that robot that we built to do product photography for us. It does a nice job.
So that's one of the technologies that your team is building.
It's built already.
Okay.
It was a fun one. It took a long time, but it certainly solved a number of problems for us to be able to just to bring in thousands of products every day onto our platform and have them look much better than they would have if we had a human photographer photograph them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, setting aside the most skilled product photographers who, of course, do
Would cost
amazing work.
fortunes.
Exactly,
Yeah.
right.
And
Yeah.
then another feature was where the customer could put in any health characteristics or concerns that they're looking out for, and the algorithm could tailor suggestions based on that. So you shared with my students the back end where your physicians are inputting the peer-reviewed journal findings about recommendations related to health and chronic disease.
Exactly. I mean, it turns out that there are these specific food disease interactions that are really interesting. And sometimes we have some idea of how the pharmacology works, and sometimes we don't. But in our view, even if we don't understand why a particular food is beneficial for a particular chronic condition, the worst case scenario is, you eat more broccoli, So in our view, there's really no harm in nudging customers to choose the option that, based on the totality of the literature, says this is the healthiest or among one of the few
I can
healthy
think
things you
of
can
people
eat.
that could come up with, you know, with concerns about that because the evidence is always changing and it's never conclusive. But I do agree with you that the more you can use research, whether on the nutrition and health front or on the behavioral science front, to inform the algorithms, the more you're countering the product placement of unhealthy food, right? Is that you're trying to place food with the goal of making someone healthier.
Absolutely. I mean, and
Yeah.
that's why we have that back end in the first place, that this is not like a static set of information that never changes,
Mm-hmm.
but the information that powers the recommendations that our platform is making are continuously updated as the body of evidence changes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's also important to remember that the mass media would have us believe that the totality of the evidence is constantly shifting,
Mhm.
and
And
that's
then
not
there are all these
true.
other fun aspects you mentioned that could be positive behavioral nudges, like, oh, you mentioned that you will sell unhealthy food as well, which I think is smart from a strategic point of view, because if someone wants to buy an unhealthy product and it's not on your website, they're going to close your website and open another one or go to the store. So
Right.
you want to keep them there. That's the idea. And then you will have these nudges like, oh, did you know that watermelons are on sale? Or this is so many people are buying so and so right now with something healthy, and all the things that consumer websites are always doing to nudge us in ways that might not necessarily help us.
Yeah, I mean, I think the important thing there is that if someone ends up not finding the Tostitos or whatever it is that they're looking for on the platform, and they do end up going into the supermarket to try to find them, they're probably going to come out with 5 more things that.
Right. You
Mm,
mentioned that 70% on average of our purchases in a supermarket are impulse purchases. Is
that's
that
correct.
correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So, another interesting aspect of the business model, moving beyond the product itself, is that you initially thought of first targeting, B2C, just the general population, and then potentially offering a more tailored version to employers, for example, like a B2B version. And now it sounds like you're flipping it and starting by testing with employers, given the realization that one of the few, if not the only stakeholder that's actually incentivized to have a healthy population is self-insured companies, right? So
Yeah.
tell us
Yeah.
more about how would that work and how did you come to that realization and what are your preliminary efforts looking like in terms of testing out that market?
Yes, I mean the realization is that we can only serve so many customers on day one. So we really ought to go to great lengths to make sure that the customers we are serving are the ones who really need it most.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you're right, employers are the ones, of all the players in the healthcare system. And we're hearing every day as part of the political debate, certainly as part of the 2020 presidential campaign, how broken and misaligned the incentives are in our healthcare system. But the one place where incentives actually are pretty well aligned are employers that self-insure for their healthcare benefits. These employers are looking for ways to do something about the runaway increases in healthcare spending year over year. And I think that more and more they're recognizing that the best way to reduce healthcare spend is to keep their employee population healthy. And that's where we come in. We have a fairly radical intervention that, in a lot of ways, hasn't been tried before, but elements of it aren't necessarily new. What we're just sort of coming in and doing is putting the pieces together and saying, look, if we eliminate all the systemic barriers to healthy eating, and on top of it, we build in personalized, dynamic coaching towards specific foods that can help to strategically optimize the patient's reversal path, reversing their chronic disease conditions, preventing them from getting other chronic disease conditions.
You'll save a lot of money.
Exactly. That's the way to actually not just arrest the year-over-year increases in spending, but actually lead to decreases in healthcare spending in the best possible way, which is by keeping the employee population and their families healthy.
So what I'm hearing is that just like the bricks and mortar supermarket is not necessarily making all its profit from the customer purchases, but it's from these partnerships with manufacturers. That's what you're trying to replace with the employers. You're not going to, your financial viability may not rely on the customers themselves if you're competing with other online platforms for price and convenience and everything, but it could be from the employers themselves. Like that could be the key to the financial viability, correct?
I think it's the key to scaling quickly.
Interesting.
I think the key to scaling quickly has a lot to do with working with the right employers on day one, the ones who are committed to the same goals
Rather
that we
than
are.
fighting for individual customers. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. Rather than, I mean, it's important, we're somewhat selective too in the employers that we're engaged in talks with, that we want to make sure that the employers that we're talking to have the same goal that we do, which is not to cut costs in any way possible, but to cut costs by keeping their employees healthy in the first place. And employers need to be willing to invest up front in order to do that. But of course, the savings that come back to them will, the savings come back to them, orders of magnitude exceeding what the initial investment is. It's not just any employer that has the foresight to frankly just the commitment to doing the right thing that would be willing to sort of be customer number one. And so from our standpoint, this is very much a partnership between us and the employer. There's a lot of, because the systemic barriers to healthy eating also exist in the workplace, for example. So it's very important to us to make sure that we're picking the right partners to work with in order to show that we actually can indeed reduce healthcare spend in a 2 to 3 year time horizon. Once we've done that, I think the floodgates probably open, and there are going to be probably a lot of employers that want to kind of ride that wave of success.
And in terms of reaching a large number of people, and in terms of the operations and logistics, it's also pretty smart because you're finding people that are clustered in the same location, which is really important for
that
you
helps.
as you're starting.
Yeah.
So how are the results so far in terms of, is anyone biting? How are you approaching this? Or is this a new pivot in your model? Because I understand it's still under development.
Yeah, so I mean, we are having preliminary conversations with several different employers who are receptive, and I think that the logic of it is fundamentally sound, and I think that they see that. I think that they understand that even if they just look at their employee population who currently have type 2 diabetes, if they're an employer that is large enough such that they have more than 250 patients who already have type 2 diabetes, then it's really not a controversial assumption. It's not a controversial assertion that they're going to save money in the long run, and that they're going to recoup their initial investment in this intervention and working with us, just on that population alone.
Right. So this is an interesting venture to me because it is a public health intervention, and at the same time, it's a tech company. So usually when I hear public health intervention, I think, 10 or 20 years, grant funded, maybe state, foundation, NIH. When I hear tech company, I think, like 3 to 5 years, maximum 7, venture capital funding. And so your company is both of those things.
Right.
So how have you navigated that? It sounds like you're definitely taking the long point of view, right? So you must have made a conscious decision not to go the venture capital way. So tell me more about that.
Sure.
Was it necessitated by your need to take time in developing all these technologies? Is the grant funding enough to build this kind of technology? How is that all working out?
Sure. So I guess first of all, in terms of timeframes, one of the things that's important to realize is that employers need to see results in a 2 to 3 year time horizon in order for it to make sense for them to invest upfront in
No,
an
I mean the time
intervention.
frame of you
Right.
getting your product to market from when you started.
Sure, right, exactly. So getting to the point where we could have an intervention that might yield results in 2 to 3 years, and that we're really convinced will yield results in 2 to 3 years, that in and of itself took many more than 3 years
Yeah.
to build all of the technology required to make that possible. And you're absolutely right. I like to say that Actual Food is a well-funded company, which is not to say that we have been funded with a huge amount of dollars, but it's the right kind of money. So, which is to say that we haven't taken any venture capital or angel investment. All of the funding that we've taken, all of the outside funding that we've taken is non-dilutive, which is to say philanthropists, individual philanthropists and foundations have been good enough to fund us. And that's enabled us to take the long view, exactly as you're saying. And, I mean, a VC fund probably would have needed an exit within
They
8
would have been getting
years.
impatient by now.
Absolutely. And I'm not faulting them. They're not in the business of funding social enterprises that take 15 years to turn a profit. But in this case, to solve this particular problem, that was the amount of time that was needed. And so the kind of capital that was required was philanthropic. And that is true to this day. To this day, all of the dollars that we're raising are still philanthropic dollars.
So, where do you stand now? What's next? And what are the greatest barriers and challenges that you're facing?
It's a really nice place to be right now. That when we started, the biggest potential showstoppers to what we were doing were technological. The biggest risk was technological risk. Could we build the logistics and fulfillment technologies that we've built, and would they perform to the degree that they need to perform? And we knew that kind of pretty early on. We knew there were some pretty clear benchmarks that these technologies needed to meet. And it wasn't necessarily clear that it was possible to build the technologies that we ended up needing to build. And it certainly wasn't clear that we would be able to build those technologies for less than $100 million. So that was those biggest showstoppers. Now that those technologies are built, that technological risk is behind us. It's a really nice feeling, because now the remaining uncertainty is manageable. It's entirely possible that the interventions on the online ordering platform that nudge consumers from one product to another may need to be tuned, but we're prepared for that.
Right.
The entire online ordering platform is built to do A/B testing of those features. So given enough time and enough capital, we are quite confident that we will get to the point where the online ordering platform is an effective tool at nudging customers towards those healthier choices and changing the employees' diets to a degree that is sufficient to actually reverse their chronic conditions.
So, how do you keep up you're running a marathon, right?
Yeah.
How do you keep up the momentum and the energy all these years later?
Well, I guess it's what's the alternative, right? I mean, there were a set of factors that led me to do this in the first place, and those things haven't changed. If anything, I knowing all that I do now about how the food system works and how the food system doesn't work, how the food system nudges us in the wrong direction when it comes to what we eat. I don't know that one can swallow the red pill, so to speak, and then just suddenly forget that and then go back to saying, I want to build video games.
Yeah, and you shared a funny quote from a movie that was kind of like the reversal of Bayes' theorem. Do you remember what it was?
It was just Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes has this famous saying that when all other contingencies fail, whatever remains, no matter how unlikely, must be correct.
So that's basically what you're doing.
In a sense, on a personal level, I suppose that's true. Yeah,
It seems impossible, but the other ones definitely aren't the way. So let's just try this until we fail. and make it succeed.
I like that phrasing a little better for sure. I mean, I think no. I mean, to be absolutely sure, there are so many things in the world that are worth doing, that are worth working on right now. This happens to be the area where I think that I can make an impact. I mean, and I choose to believe that there are enough other people working on things like climate change and income inequality and all of the other problems that are, I mean, even things, just you look here locally in New Haven, and just as we were walking down here, I was on the phone with a friend and we were talking about police brutality and immigrant rights and making sure that New Haven really is a sanctuary city, and it really makes me incredibly reassured when I think about the universe of people who are working on all of those problems, and it's tremendously motivating to me to think of them and how hard they work. Yeah, sometimes the going is tough when you're building technology, but it's not in any way as difficult as what they're doing, the harm's way that they're putting themselves in physically.
That's a really
every
good point,
day.
and a good point to end on. Thank you so much, Greg, for taking us along for the ride. And I hope that you're able to mobilize the right people around this, whether funders or employers or all the different stakeholders that need to come together to make your vision a reality.
Well, me too. Thank you so much, Teresa, for having me. This was a lot of fun. And hey, for all you software engineers out there listening, hey, we're hiring. So
Awesome. Thanks, Greg.